Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's program. Today's program is taken right out of the hypertrophy files. And the hypertrophy files are part of a series of lectures that I produced for you doctors out of the Basic Science series for Chiropractic Continuing Education. And today's program is approved for 6 hours of continuing education in the general category by the Board of Chiropractic Examiners. So welcome to the program and thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy today's program quite a bit and that you get a lot out of it. The focus of today's program is going to be on two words, and these are two words that I tell almost every one of my patients on almost every single visit that I have with them. And these are some profound words, and you don't have to say really much more than these two words to your patients. And if you're able to get a head nod from your patients after you repeat this mantra to them, you'll know that you're doing the very best thing that you can for them. And this applies to you as well. Today's program is entitled Exercise Recommendations for Chiropractors and Their Patients. And so today's program is directed, first of all, doctors, at you, because I know what your life is like, and I know what it's like to be a chiropractor, because I am a chiropractor, and I've been a chiropractor for 27 years, and I know that being a chiropractor is a physical job. It's a physically demanding, it's a heavy lifting job. So we have those physical demands on us. Also, as respected healthcare authorities, we also serve as role models to our patients. So it's important that we practice what we preach. And so I direct this program first and foremost to you, doctor, and then also to your patients. And the mantra and the two words that I constantly reinforce both to myself and to my patients, and that I want to impart to you and your patients, is to up muscle. Up muscle. It's the philosophy of this program, and it's my sincere opinion that we need to continually focus on increasing the muscle mass content of our body, and this is regardless of age. In fact, as we age through our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, I don't know where you lie on that spectrum, but speaking for myself, I'm probably at the midpoint of that spectrum and inching perhaps slightly past the midpoint of that spectrum. And as we do age, it becomes even more important to focus on upping the muscle mass content of our bodies. So that's the whole purpose of our program today, is to learn how to preserve muscle mass and how to promote and grow new muscle mass regardless of our age, regardless of our physical condition, or regardless of any limitations that we may think that we have that prevent us from doing just that, from building new muscle. So this is called the hypertrophy files, and this is one of several lessons in the hypertrophy files, which is a series of exercise, dietary, and lifestyle techniques designed to promote muscle hypertrophy. So today we're going to talk about lesson number 1 from the hypertrophy files. And today we're going to focus on some exercise techniques involving and focusing on 3 very narrow principles. We're going to narrow this entire concept down to 3 simple, effective, and extremely powerful techniques that you and your patients can implement right away that will tremendously improve and enhance the benefits that you get from standard exercise, whether those be performed in a health club or whether those be performed at home with simple and inexpensive implements. And those 3 simple principles that we're going to focus on in this program include, number 1, the biarticular muscles, the eccentric muscle actions, and the pre-stretch principle. And of course, we'll elaborate over the next 6 hours on these 3 principles. So if you're ready with me, I'd like you to grab your handout materials for your note-taking benefit. Grab you a snack and a drink and get ready to get down to some brass tacks of anatomy, physiology, and the science behind muscle hypertrophy. Okay, now our next technique that we want to briefly discuss is the focus on eccentric muscle actions. Eccentric muscle action. Remember, technique number 1 was to focus on biarticular muscles. So here we are now at technique number 2, which is to focus on eccentric muscle actions. Now, I'm sure this is a review for many of you, most of you. There's 3 types of muscle actions. We used to call these muscle contractions, but now these are referred to as muscle actions. And the reason is it's a misnomer to say that an eccentric muscle action is a contraction, because a contraction implies or refers to shortening. And with eccentric muscle actions, we actually have a lengthening of the muscle rather than a shortening. So we don't refer to those as contractions anymore. We refer to them as muscle actions. So the first type of muscle action is the concentric muscle action. And with concentric muscle actions, the muscle force is greater than the resistive force. And when that happens, when muscle force is greater than resistive force, we get a joint motion in the direction of the applied muscle force. In other words, we get a shortening contraction of the muscle. And that's what happens when you lift a weight. When you lift a weight, your muscle force is greater than the resistive force, and the weight gets lifted. If the resistive force was greater than the muscle force, you would get crushed, right? Okay? So that's what happens with concentric actions. The muscle force is greater than the resistive force, and we get a movement of the weight in the direction of the applied muscle force. Now, with an isometric muscle action, the muscle force is equal to the resistive force, and we get no joint motion. So in other words, we get contraction of the muscle with no change in the muscle's overall length. And you can demonstrate an isometric muscle action to yourself by placing your 2 palms together in front of you and simply pushing palm to palm as hard as you can. You can tell that there's a contraction of your biceps and your pectoralis major muscles, but neither of your hands is moving, because the resistive force that you're applying with one hand to the other hand is exactly equal and opposite to the applied muscle force. And so we get no change in the muscle's overall length. Well, finally, we have eccentric muscle actions. And with eccentric muscle actions, we see that the muscle force is less than the resistive force. And we get a joint motion in the direction of the resistive force. In other words, we get a lengthening action of the muscle. And this is what happens when you lower weights. When you're doing the bench press and you lower that weight to your chest, the reason that weight lowers is because you are reducing your applied muscle force to allow the resistive force, meaning the weight of the weight itself, to allow the resistive force to overcome the muscle force to bring that bar back down to your chest. Similarly, while doing, say for example, squat exercises, when you descend down into the full squat position, the reason you descend is because the muscle force that your legs are applying against gravity is temporarily reduced, such that the weight of your body combined with gravity overcomes the muscle force, and gravity then drives you down to the ground, and we get a lengthening action of all the muscles in the legs that are involved. Now, of these three muscle actions, we want to turn our attention to the eccentric muscle actions because, as we stated earlier, the eccentric muscle actions have hypertrophic superiority compared to both isometric and or concentric muscle actions. And I want to review a few studies with you to familiarize you on the research that's been done in this area of eccentric muscle actions and the benefits that eccentric training can have for us. And later on in the program, I want to give you some practical and effective adaptations that you can use to integrate these eccentric muscle actions into your and your patients' resistance training programs. Because in most of these studies that are conducted in universities and research centers, not much is explained about actually how eccentric muscle actions are studied. And so there's not a lot known about how to apply eccentric muscle actions in the conventional health club setting. So I'm going to give you some useful and practical recommendations when it comes time for that. But first I want to go over a couple of studies, the first one of which was published in 2004 in the Journal of Strength, Conditioning, and Research. And the title of this study was regarding musculoskeletal adaptations to 16 weeks of eccentric progressive resistance training in young women. And what this study sought to determine was what was the relative adaptations of the musculoskeletal system to three different types of resistance, to two different types of training. High intensity resistance training, low intensity resistance training, or no training at all. And when we're talking about the high and low intensity training protocols, we're talking about eccentric muscle actions. So we had high intensity eccentric muscle actions, low intensity eccentric muscle actions, or control groups. And so the reason I include this study here with you, for you, is to show that it's not always necessary to train at the extreme high end of the intensity scale in order to get some beneficial adaptations in the musculoskeletal system. So what this study did is it assigned young women, average age 24, to three different groups: a high-intensity group, a low-intensity group, and a group that did not engage in exercise at all. And they measured their strength, they measured their bone mass, they measured their body composition, they measured blood markers of bone metabolism, and again they measured muscular strength both before and after 16 weeks of these either high intensity or low intensity training program. And what they found was that in both groups, both the high intensity group and the low intensity group, strength increased somewhere between 20 to 40% in both training groups. Both groups, both the low intensity group and the high intensity group, showed increases in strength somewhere between 20 and 40%. Lean body mass, meaning hypertrophy, increased in the low intensity group and in the high intensity group. Bone mineral content, which is important in women, increased in the low intensity group only. And basically the conclusions of the study were that submaximal, meaning even lower intensity, eccentric training is optimal for musculoskeletal adaptations, And the intensity of eccentric training influences the early patterns of bone adaptation, with low intensity training actually promoting bone deposition better than did high intensity training. So the result of this study is that when you incorporate eccentric muscle actions into your training protocol, you can get more bang for your buck because you don't necessarily have to exercise at the extreme high end of the intensity scale to produce significant increases in strength and in lean body mass. Okay, a couple other studies that support the benefits of eccentric muscle actions. We're going to go over these one by one, and I include these for you in your reference materials. The first one of which was published in 2002 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. And the title of this program, this study, was about the effects of increased eccentric loading on bench press 1RM. So what is increased eccentric loading? Well, as I said earlier, every lift has two components. It has a lift and a lower, and the lifting component is the concentric component, and the lowering component is the eccentric component. Now, in every lift, the eccentric component is underweighted, meaning that you can always lower under control much more weight than you can lift. Let me say that again. You can always lower more weight under control than you can lift. So, for example, if your one repetition maximum on the bench press is 200 pounds, you can probably lower 230 pounds under control without injury or without risk of injury. Well, so therefore in the bench press, the lowering phase is underweighted. We could use more weight, but we have no way to add extra weight on the lowering phase. And so we're stuck with choosing a weight, the weak link of which is the lifting or concentric phase. So this study bypassed the weak link by adding eccentric loading to the bench press, and then sought to determine, okay, what was the effect of consistent training with increased eccentric loading on subsequent strength testing in the bench press. So let me read this study to you. You'll find it quite fascinating. The purpose of this study was to measure the effects of additional eccentric loading on subsequent concentric strength. 8 subjects with some experience in weight training volunteered to perform maximal attempts in the barbell bench press using detaching hooks that allowed them to lower 105%. So, in other words, they determined the one repetition maximum of each of these 8 subjects and then allowed them to perform barbell bench press training with a weight greater than the one repetition maximum. In fact, it was 105%, an additional 5%. So this is what we call a supramaximal load. The fact that they were lowering 105% is more than their maximum. We call this a supramaximal load. It's a supramaximal load compared to their concentric one repetition maximum. So they used detaching hooks, and the detaching hooks allowed attachment of extra weight to the bar and would release from the bar at the bottom of the lift, reducing the weight lifted during the concentric phase of the lift. And I have an exercise for you later on in the program that demonstrates exactly this method, not by the use of detaching hooks, but through the use of a training partner. So after determining their one repetition maximum for the bench press, The subjects attempted to increase their performance by using a heavier eccentric load with the detaching hooks. All 8 subjects who completed the study increased their 1 repetition maximums by 5 to 10 pounds. The conclusion of this study was that the use of additional eccentric loading significantly increased the weight that could be lifted on the subsequent concentric phase, and therefore increased the 1 repetition max performance. This phenomena was a result of the enhancement of stretch shortening cycle performance by the increased eccentric load. Athletes who are interested in developing 1 repetition maximum strength in the bench press may benefit from the use of additional eccentric loading. This additional eccentric loading is also sometimes referred to as accentuated eccentric loading. So we can use accentuated eccentric loading in our program design so that we require ourselves or our patients or our athletes or whoever it is that we're working with to lower greater weights than they are required to lift. And in so doing, this then translates later into an increased capacity for lifting, which then contributes to muscle hypertrophy due to the greater amount of weight lifted. Okay, in another study regarding the relationship of eccentric muscle actions to hypertrophy and to subsequent concentric muscle strength. This was a 2004 study in the Journal of Applied Physiology. Was entitled Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy in Response to Isometric, Lengthening, and Shortening Training Bouts of Equivalent Duration. So this was a study that compared isometric muscle actions, eccentric muscle actions, and concentric muscle actions to determine the relative contribution of each of those muscle actions to subsequent muscle hypertrophy. And the conclusion was that as far as the hypertrophy was concerned, at least in this one particular study, the findings for hypertrophy were equivocal. However, they found that the eccentric training resulted in greater increases in strength than the concentric mode of training. And in my opinion, what do you think would subsequently happen if you were allowed to train with greater increases in strength over a period of time, say, for example, 90 days or 180 days or even a year? It's my opinion, and the research supports this, although this study, because it was for too short of a duration, it was only an 8-week study, did not demonstrate significant gains in hypertrophy, but it's my speculation, and other studies, some of which we'll talk about in just a minute, they do demonstrate that over time, training with heavier weights as a result of getting stronger through eccentric muscle training, this does contribute to hypertrophy with longer and longer periods of time. And so for this reason, we want to incorporate eccentric muscle actions over the long haul, from now until forever, to allow the hypertrophic superiority of the eccentric muscle actions time to create the necessary adaptations. So that study was equivocal on hypertrophy, but was positive for increases in strength gains. Another study I want to share with you is a 2010 study entitled The Comparison of Muscular Strength Gains Utilizing Eccentric, Standard, and Concentric Resistance Training Programs. And as far as this study was concerned, the conclusion was that the findings of these studies suggest that eccentric-only protocols preferentially increase strength development over standard protocols. Standard protocols are commonly utilized in athletic resistance training protocols. This finding becomes even more significant when considering the magnitude of the gain, which was 22% in only 6 weeks, with a recreationally trained group of participants. Increases of this magnitude are usually attributed to neural changes in untrained subjects, and these results suggest that eccentric muscle actions are underutilized in standard resistance training protocols. And that's my point exactly, and that's part of the whole philosophy of this program, is that we want to accentuate the eccentric portion of the muscle action, because those muscle actions are underutilized. In fact, I consider eccentric muscle actions the great untapped domain of weight training activity. And as far as I know, there are no current exercise programs, providers, vendors, philosophies, or instruction in how to incorporate eccentric muscle actions in a practical way into standard resistance training protocols. And that's the purpose of today's program, is to give you some ideas along those lines. Another study I want to share with you relating to muscular hypertrophy and eccentric muscle actions. This is a 2011 study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research entitled Muscular Hypertrophy and Changes in Cytokine Production After Eccentric Training in the Rat Skeletal Muscle. And the conclusion of this study, without going into the whole thing of it, this was a study on rats. They showed that the results showed that repeated sessions of eccentric training for 20 days causes increase in muscular size and strength. And this is due to the chronic effects of repeated eccentric training, and this is important for muscular hypertrophy. So with rats, what they did was they had them run downhill eccentric training. They had to put on the engine brakes, so to speak, and resist the acceleration due to gravity. Well, they did this for only 20 days. And unlike one of our earlier studies that showed equivocal findings for hypertrophy, this particular study, at least in rats, did demonstrate increases in both muscular size and in muscular strength. Okay, and then one more study to share with you. This one is out of the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2007, and we're concerned here about the impact of eccentric muscle actions on hypertrophy. So this study was entitled The Influence of Concentric and Eccentric Resistance Training on Architectural Adaptation, meaning muscle fiber adaptation, in human quadricep muscles. And the conclusion of this particular study was that researchers reported increases in fiber length due to the addition of sarcomeres in muscles exposed to chronic eccentric work, and decreases or lack of change in muscles exposed to chronic concentric work. Let me say that again. Researchers reported increases in fiber length. Now, increases in fiber length due to the addition of sarcomeres, that's synonymous with hypertrophy. That's what hypertrophy is. It's increases in fiber length and or fiber cross-sectional area. And muscles hypertrophy through the addition of additional sarcomeres, which are the functional units of contractile muscle. So in muscles exposed to chronic eccentric work, researchers noted hypertrophy, whereas they noted decreases or even lack of change in muscles exposed to chronic concentric only concentric only type of work. So what's the conclusion of all these studies, and what's the point of this philosophy that I'm painstakingly elaborating on here in this program? The conclusion is that we must incorporate eccentric muscle actions in each repetition of each set of each exercise. And it's not necessary that the eccentric muscle action be a supramaximal load, because we found in one of our studies that even a low intensity eccentric muscle action contributes to increased bone mass, increased strength, and increased muscle hypertrophy. So the practical application that we're going to get into in this program is a concept known as accentuated eccentric, abbreviated AE. And with accentuated eccentric muscle actions, we're going to increase the load as a percentage of one repetition maximum on the eccentric phase of the exercises. As I said earlier, the eccentric phase of the exercises are usually underweighted. Well, we can increase the weight by applying the concept of accentuated eccentric. And we can apply additional eccentric load anywhere along the one repetition maximum continuum, including 80% of the 1 RM, 100% of the 1 RM, or even 120% of the 1 RM. And I have a video coming up for you here shortly on dumbbell pullovers, where we actually do approximately 120% on the eccentric action compared to 100% on the concentric action. And I'll demonstrate that as we get there. In conclusion, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I hope you enjoyed this program. Now you have a 20-question examination that I need you to complete and either fax or email back to me. My fax number is on the top of the examination form, and just as soon as I receive your examination form, I will provide you with a certificate of completion that you can use for your Board of Chiropractors continuing education credit. For now, I want to leave you with the website for chiropractors, which is entitled Chiropractic.com. We're always coming up with new programs, so check the website frequently for new programs designed to help you succeed as a chiropractor. Again, Dr. Perry Carpenter wishing you great success. If there's ever anything I can do to help you, feel free to call. Again, thanks for being with me on this program, and best of success.